So ain't nothing wrong, okay?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Black Science Cooperative. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about patient advocacy with our special guest, Dr. Angela Anderson. Dr. Anderson is going to walk us through her personal story as a patient and tell us a bit about her patient journey. But before we begin there, Angela, can you just tell us a little bit about your background and your commitment to helping others?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you all for having this platform to have conversations like these. It's so important that we have a space where we can have open, honest conversations about issues that plague us as Black women in particular. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. I am a product of Dillard University in New Orleans. I left there, went to the University of Northern Iowa, and then finished my doctoral studies at the University of Phoenix in Phoenix, Arizona. So my journey has taken many twists and turns, but all of them were necessary. So initially started in behavioral health, went into hospital administration after serving as a therapist and director of clinical services for many years, went into more of a corporate space thereafter, believe it or not, in sales. We have to be multifaceted, right? And then ultimately landed after doing some executive coaching, writing, and speaking for a while, where I currently sit, which is in pharma. So I work for Novartis Pharmaceuticals currently.
Okay. All right. So our main mission here at Black Scientists Cooperative is to take health-related information and make it accessible for our audience members, so that they can better advocate for their own health and wellness or that of their loved ones. So we recently read an article in Forbes where you described a recent challenge with receiving fair and equitable healthcare. Can you kind of walk us through the experience?
Sure. So I will tell you this. This is probably the first time since the article that I have gone through the experience again. And it is still quite fresh because this just happened at the beginning of June. Interestingly enough, my birthday is in the month of June. And at the beginning of every June, I always say, I'm going to celebrate the entire month. So it was June 1st. I had that conversation with some good friends and got up on June 2nd and prepared for work like we do every single day. Went through the entire day. And that night, as I prepared for bed, I was experiencing a pain like I had never experienced before. I couldn't sit down. I couldn't lie down. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was, something I'd eaten or what it was. And so it was literally in the middle of the night. And so the next morning, I said that I would get up, I would go to an urgent care facility just to check it out because I couldn't rest. And so I went to the first facility where I waited for over an hour to be sent to a second facility where um, that's where the journey really began, the one that I didn't anticipate. Uh, I explained exactly what I was feeling. And of course, when you present to a medical facility and you are saying that you are experiencing chest pains, you expect a certain response or a certain protocol. I also had my husband with me, who is a medical doctor as well, and he was explaining what had happened over the course of the night. And sadly to say, the provider looked in my nose and he said, "Oh, I know what it is." He said, "You have postnasal drip." And we kind of sat there and we said, "That has nothing to do with my chest." "Oh, it's just because when you're sleeping, your sinuses are draining, which causes you to cough in your sleep, and that's why your chest is hurting." After I'd explained that I had not been sleeping because of the pain. So we requested a chest x-ray. To which the provider said, well, I don't necessarily hear anything. I don't recommend it, but since you're here, I'll give it to you. And so went through a series of trials to get the x-ray, but ultimately we did. And I could see that there was something on the x-ray that just didn't look like it should look. Now, I'm not a radiologist, but I know how my x-ray should look. And so I started to ask questions, as my husband did as well. And the doctor said, well, you're not in respiratory distress and your x-ray is clear, and sent me home with an inhaler and the instructions that I needed to cough often, and that I needed to blow my nose often, and that I should be fine. So I went home and I knew that something was just, you know how you have that feeling where you know
Mhm.
something just isn't right? You know your body. And
Yep.
I had no previous medical conditions prior to this event. And so I went home and I said, okay, I'm just going to take Tylenol just to try to alleviate the pain, just so I can try to sit down at least. And for the next 2 days, that's what happened. So I went back to a third provider after contacting the administrator over the urgent care facilities and explaining what had happened. And there were many details, which you saw in the article, that were just unbelievable, but happened, right? And it was that third provider, who happens to be a female as well, who said, I need you to immediately go to the emergency room. I do not want you to stop. Don't eat, don't drink, go straight there. It was there they did the CT scan and discovered that my blood pressure was elevated, which was typically not the case. And the doctor says to me, do you have a will? Yes. And I said, I was thrown off by the question. And he says, well, you may not, because, you're typically young and healthy. He says, but I'm going to have to keep you for a few days because you have a pulmonary embolism in the lower lobe of your right lung. You also have pneumonia, and you have experienced a lung infarction in your right lung, which is where the pain was coming from. That had gone completely undiagnosed through 2 other providers and 4 additional days prior to getting to this provider. So they immediately admitted me, started an IV protocol for blood thinners and antibiotics. And the next 4 days I spent in the hospital um, trying to be stabilized so the clot wouldn't move. And so it was just so scary. Like, that's the word I use to describe it, because we go through our day to day, right? And we have our daily responsibilities. I'm a mom of 2 girls, 13 and 9. And so the idea of not being here with them was scary as it was happening, but also after it was over. And so that was the experience in a nutshell. But fortunately, I am here to tell the story now with all of you.
Wow, I'm just, even after reading the article, I'm just at the edge of my seat. And I think, and later, I have a similar story to that, but I won't share it tonight. And it's because it's still so fresh. And each part of your story, I can literally, relate to my experience. And but one of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on is during that time and your conversations with different healthcare providers and asking those questions. And it was a plus, I'm sure, with your husband's been an MD, but even with that, when you're talking to healthcare providers, there's a sense of intimidation that takes place there. One, because, you're hearing all of these terms and some kind of way in your head, you're thinking, because I'm not I'm not in that field. I don't want to ask the wrong question. I don't want to sound a certain way. So, you kind of feel intimidated to ask questions, speak up, or even challenge the doctor, because in your mind, you feel like they, at the end of the day, have your best interest at heart. And not to say that that's the case, but you ask those questions, you really advocated for yourself. And a lot of times we have to advocate for our loved ones too, and ask those questions, whether you think they are irrelevant or not. It's important for you to understand that. But what advice would you share with our viewers when it comes to speaking up, to asking those questions? Should you just take what your healthcare provider is saying, or should you speak up? Like, what advice do you give to our viewers on that?
So it's exactly what you said. We have to. And my story is just one. As you mentioned, you have your story. I'm sure all the other ladies, they have their own stories, or they know people who have this story. And in the article, you saw where I said, I wish this was uncommon, but unfortunately is not. And so we have an obligation to speak up, because if we don't, it could literally be life or death. And I know it can be intimidating, right? Especially if you're not accustomed to being in the field of healthcare or medicine. And there's this degree of trust, right? Because when you go and you seek medical help and medical attention, you trust that what you're being told is accurate and that
Absolutely.
the provider has your best interest at heart, which I think is why it was so jarring for me as well, because I know what's supposed to happen. I know that if a person presents saying, I'm having severe chest pains, what is supposed to happen next? And when that didn't happen, I knew that this was going to be something very different, right? Very different. And so to any of the viewers, I would just say, I know it can be intimidating if that is not your usual area, but you literally have to push past it for your life potentially. You must. And so that temporary fear is nothing in comparison to what could potentially happen if you don't advocate for yourself or your loved ones. And so it's just one of those things where you just have to. You just have to.
So, having gone through this and, not personally being an MD, but knowing an MD, living with an MD, and being in healthcare as an administrator, what did you take away personally in regards to health equity and healthcare system? And did this experience change that viewpoint from where you were previously?
So many things, right? There are so many things I took away from this experience, but I think my view was a little bit different anyway, because as I told you, I began in behavioral health. And so I was an advocate anyway, because a lot of times I was working with people who could not speak up for themselves, did not have the ability, did not have the wherewithal. Maybe they didn't have the family support. And so I was already in this place of understanding the importance of advocacy and very passionate about it. Even as I was experiencing the pain, I looked at my husband and I said, we know what's supposed to happen and this is occurring. What about the elderly? What about the uninsured? What
Yep.
about those who have English as a second language? What about the mentally ill? Like, there were so many populations that were running through my mind in that moment around, what if they didn't know that this is not how this is supposed to go? What about them? And so
So,
that's really why the article came about.
And so I feel like, from hearing your story and how you already had recognized that the x-ray had already showed some abnormalities, I feel like you had already raised that point to the provider that was treating you at that time. So that puts an extra layer of, I can't believe this is happening, on that. So I'm curious as to how this experience, and especially with it being to this extreme, how it might influence your interactions in the future with other healthcare providers, and maybe what that might look like for you.
So I think if it's even possible, I think it invigorated me even more, because now it's not just my story. It doesn't just belong to me. The fact that I'm here when the odds were clearly stacked against me and I was told multiple times that I shouldn't be here, there's a reason for that. And so I feel a responsibility and an obligation to make sure that my story is shared, but also to create the space for other people to share their stories, because it is a lot, not just physically, but the mental aftermath, if you will, of this sort of experience is very heavy and it's very taxing. And I think there's just so many, particularly Black women, that are carrying these loads and they haven't had the opportunity to share their stories. And so that's really where I am at this point. I'm still working through my own story, right? And still coming to terms as the clot still sits in my lungs. And I'm still going through the treatment for that. But I just want these stories to be heard. I want people to know how often this happens. And I want people to know the devastating, oftentimes fatal results that can occur if we don't shine a light on this issue.
Right. So I want to put on a healthcare administration hat for just a second, and tell the viewers that, while not everybody may feel comfortable, grieving or putting those things and airing those grievances to that doctor, because a lot of people have what's called the white coat syndrome. They feel like, that white coat is the utmost authority and I can't question it and I can't move past that and I can't complain. So there is a marked difference in healthcare between making a complaint and making a grievance. And, honestly, I will tell everybody, a grievance could potentially hit that hospital or that provider in their pockets. And sometimes people don't listen until those things and monetary damages are involved, and having that layer of that grievance. So filing a grievance means in writing complaint to that hospital or to that entity within 30 days of that incident, and making sure that you are ticking and tying all of the details together, because I've sat on those committees and they go over timelines in very minute details. Well, at 6:07, she said this. At 6:08, we did that. At 6:10, this is what happened. There was no movement overnight. What happened did this patient fall through the cracks? They look at what the staffing was. They look at how busy it was. And so all of those things come into play. And fortunately, you're here to tell your tale to us today. But there are some individuals who don't make it. And, there has to be an advocate for them on that side, a family member or a person. So if you feel like you're intimidated in those situations, bring someone else, bring your big mouth cousin with you who's going to speak up for you, in that moment. Because even if you're not feeling well, you already don't feel well. So you're not, as robust and as yourself as you would be in a normal situation. So sometimes you've got to bring that person along who's not afraid to question what's going on, especially if you as the patient has questions.
Yeah.
And then also you also have that, like, you have that spidey, that inside voice that, man, something not right,
Mhm.
And it's important to trust that something not right, instinct that you have within to just, push forward with, trying to get the care that you want. When you get that, that's not making sense to why my, my symptoms are this way. Like, I get it, that makes sense, but I'm still not feeling very well. So
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, I think, Shantae, what you're hitting on is trust your intuition, right? Trust and believe in yourself and honor what your mind, your body is telling you, and take the opportunity to speak up. And I think, one additional thing that I like to add to the point that Charlitha raised about bringing an advocate with you, in the event that you don't have an advocate, a lot of hospital systems have what they call a patient advocacy group within the hospital. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up, you can call and request that the patient advocate come there and sit with you and be that advocate for you. And I have actually seen that work very well, where the patient feels comfortable talking to the patient advocate, and the patient advocate will then advocate to the physician and the healthcare staff for you. So there are resources in hospitals as well that, patients that unfortunately don't have a loved one that can advocate for them can use. But what I would like to say to our viewers today is you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your family, you owe it to your loved ones to do this, to advocate for yourself, to also share this message. You have to share this message with anyone and everyone that you care about. Because I have to say, this is one of the hardest episodes that I've ever had to record, because just hearing Angela's story and having the understanding that this is more common than not is a crushing blow. And as mentioned before, we all have our stories. I have a story that is very fresh that I will share at some point. But the reason why we do this, the reason why we come together and put together this platform is so that this doesn't have to happen to you, right? So that you ensure that you're getting the best possible health care and having the best possible outcome. You have to speak up for yourself. And the only way to do that is to acquire the knowledge, acquire the know-how. Get comfortable with trusting yourself.
That is so good, Milo. I think the only thing that I would add to that, and I think this is something that's common, especially for people who are very driven, right, and results oriented, we push through. We carry pushing through like a badge of honor.
Yep.
And we give ourselves pats on the back for saying, oh, I wasn't feeling my best, but I pushed through and I did it anyway. And we congratulate one another for doing that. We have to stop doing that. It could be to our detriment. I mean, to our severe detriment. We've got to change this culture around being superhuman, because we're not. We're not. And when our bodies are trying to communicate with us, we have to listen. And we need people around us who will listen to us when we share those things. And so I just want to normalize not treating yourself like a robot.
Let's normalize it. I mean, let's just look at what is it, Simone Biles?
Yes.
The gymnast, and her decision to step down from her event because of her mental health. And it was sickening to see all the posts on social media calling her a quitter and, putting her down for a decision. But to your point, let's normalize not pushing through and acknowledging and accepting and being okay with not being okay.
And normalize stepping back and having confidence in yourself that, I need 50 feet.
Yes.
I need a minute.
Right.
I need a mental break.
Yeah, I think if we realize that the physicians are experts in medicine, practicing medicine, but we are the experts of our bodies. So the physician can't tell us how we feel, what we're experiencing. They can only take what we tell them and make sense of it. And so we have to keep saying what's wrong with us if we feel like we're not getting the treatment that we deserve, which is what you did. And I think that's like one of the biggest takeaways from your story. You gotta keep finding someone until you find someone to listen to you and then help you figure out what is going on. Because if you had just stopped with that first physician, told you that you had a nasal drip, if you had just taken that at his word, well, we don't know what that outcome would have been.
Well, we
but
do.
Because you knew something was wrong, right. But you knew that there was something. You are the expert of your body. You knew as the body that there was something not right, and you kept pushing until you found somebody to listen to you. And this is what we have to do. And we have to do this.
Yes.
There's no other choice. Yes.
And I will tell you, there is a tendency, just from the stories that started to pour in from women who've experienced similar things. And there was this common thread that, oftentimes in these stories, women of color, their ailments are relegated to something emotional and not something physical. And so in those moments when that happens, you definitely have to make sure that you are describing specifically what is happening to you. I can remember, because of course there were COVID protocols at the first two facilities, of course, where I went. And so they had us sitting in my car as we were waiting to be seen. And my husband, oddly enough, he says, I know you're in severe pain, but you have to tell them something else, because we don't want them to assume that you are seeking pain medicine. And that's what he said to me. And I said, I will not navigate around their bias today. I can't. I can't. And so I'm going to tell them exactly what is happening to me. And they're going to have to listen. And if it's not them, it will be somebody. And so it's so sad to think that when you are literally in critical condition, as I was, there is still this thought that you've got to navigate around another person's bias. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And so you're right. We just have to keep going. Because in the event that something had happened to me, to your point, all of the documentation at that last provider before finding the one who believes me said that my x-ray was clear, that I was not in respiratory distress. So had I passed away, that would have been the narrative, and no one would have known any differently. And so that, again, is the reason why I will continue to tell this story, because all the documentation says something different, but that's not what was happening. I had multiple critical conditions occurring simultaneously with clear documentation that it wasn't. So it's just so important. We must, like, you just have to listen to your body, and you have to keep trying until someone listens.
That's it. Well, look, thank you, Dr. Angela Anderson, for sharing your story, for enlightening our viewers, just for your openness and your transparency. It's going to save somebody, whether it's 1 or 100. Viewers, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Black Scientists Cooperative. I will say it again. I implore you and I urge you to share this episode with everyone you know and care about. Like we said earlier, it could be a matter of life and death. You must advocate for yourself. Until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Deep flows like a breeze flowing through me, from my head to my feet. Your love runs smooth, ooh, it soothes, and you're making life right. I'm so glad that you're mine, yeah.